moment that doctor told me my son's pain was all in his head, something inside me shattered and a cold, hard resolve took its place. But was it resolve or just rage? My name is Eris Thorne, though in that sterile, white room, I was just Leo's mom. For a decade, I'd been a research scientist, pouring my life into what my own university department affectionately called my useless research, mapping correlations between seemingly benign genetic markers and latent autoimmune responses. My colleagues saw it as an academic black hole, a career ender with no practical application. My husband Mark supported me, but even he saw it as more of a hobby than a world-changing pursuit. To me, however, it was the only thing that made sense of the exhaustion clouding my 7-year-old son's eyes and the deep, aching pain in his joints that made him cry in his sleep. I tried to explain this to Dr. Jennings, the pediatric specialist with a God complex and a 3-month wait list. I'd even brought a preliminary data file, a humble printout of the markers I'd found in Leo's own saliva sample. He hadn't even glanced at it. He'd patted my hand, a gesture of patronizing dismissal that made my skin crawl, and prescribed ibuprofen. "Kids get dramatic, Mrs. Thorne," he'd said with a practiced, empty smile. "He's a healthy boy. Let's not invent problems where there are none." He didn't know it then, but in that moment, he hadn't just dismissed my son. He had made my useless research his own personal apocalypse. I drove home in a haze of fury, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. In the rearview mirror, I could see Leo in his booster seat, his small face pale and quiet. He was trying so hard to be brave. The manila folder with his data, the printout that Dr. Jennings had refused to even touch, sat on the passenger seat, a silent, mocking testament to my failure. I hadn't failed my research, I had failed my son. I hadn't fought hard enough. That doctor, with his condescending smile and starched white coat, had made me feel small, like a hysterical mother inventing phantom pains for attention. He had looked at my child, my brilliant, beautiful boy who was wasting away before my eyes, and saw a prop in a drama of my own making. That night, the ibuprofen did nothing. I was woken at 2 a.m. by a sound that has become the soundtrack to my nightmares, Leo's soft, muffled sobs. I rushed to his room and found him curled into a tight ball, his face buried in his pillow. "It's my knees again, Mommy," he whispered, his voice thick with sleep and pain. "And my elbows, they're on fire." I gathered him into my arms, his little body rigid with agony. This was the stake. This was my vulnerable, 7-year-old boy, whose suffering was dismissed as a childish fantasy. As I held him, rocking him gently and humming a lullaby he'd long outgrown, the cold resolve from the doctor's office hardened into something sharper, something with a cutting edge. This wasn't just about proving a theory anymore. This was about saving my son's life from the arrogant ignorance of a broken system. I'm documenting all of this, you know. Every dismissal, every sleepless night, every data point. I feel like I'm shouting into a void, but I have to believe someone is listening. If you've ever been in a room and been made to feel like you're crazy for simply telling the truth, then you know the isolation I'm talking about. Please like and subscribe, because this journey is just beginning and I need to know I'm not alone. As I sat there in the dark, with Leo finally drifting back into a fitful sleep in my lap, I made a promise to him and to myself. Dr. Jennings had lit a fire. Now he was going to watch my useless research burn his world to the ground. The promise I made in the dark of Leo's room was a quiet one, but it echoed through every cell in my body. The next morning I dropped a still listless Leo at school with a kiss and a bottle of water, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. Then I drove straight to the university lab. I didn't clock in. I didn't greet my colleagues. I went to my little corner of the building, the one they all joked was a dead end, and I pulled up my life's work. The rage from the doctor's office had cooled, crystallizing into a diamond-hard focus. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a scientist with a mission. For hours I worked, cross-referencing Leo's genetic markers against my database, the rhythmic clacking of my keyboard, the only sound in my self-imposed isolation. I felt a surge of adrenaline as a new correlation blinked onto the screen, a stronger link, a clearer pattern. It was there. It was all there. My phone buzzed on the desk, rattling against a stack of journals. It was Dr. Evans, my department head. My stomach tightened. He never called my cell. "Eris," he began, his voice strained, stripped of its usual collegial warmth. "I need you to come to my office, now." The walk across campus felt like a mile. When I entered his office, he didn't ask me to sit. He stood behind his large oak desk, his hands clasped, looking at a letter in front of him as if it were a venomous snake. "I received a call this morning," he said, finally meeting my eyes. His were filled with a mixture of pity and official discomfort, followed by this formal complaint. "It's from a Dr. Jennings, a pediatric specialist at County General." The name hit me like a physical blow. I could almost smell the antiseptic of his office, see the condescending glint in his eye. "He's filed a formal ethics complaint against you and this department," Evans continued, his voice low. "He alleges you are conducting unauthorized, unregulated, and emotionally biased genetic research on a minor, your own son." He slid the letter across the desk. The words leaped out at me. Unstable, maternal hysteria, fabricating data, child endangerment. I couldn't breathe. This was not a dismissal. This was an attack. That doctor hadn't just ignored me. He had taken my desperate plea to save my child and twisted it into a weapon to destroy my career, my credibility, my entire life. He was trying to have my research, Leo's only hope, shut down. He was trying to take away the one tool I had to fight back. In that moment, watching the words blur through a film of hot, furious tears, I realized the line had been crossed. This was no longer about proving him wrong. It was about survival. He had come after my work, after my name, and in doing so, he had threatened my son's life far more than any disease. He had just made it impossible for me to stop. He had made it personal. And he had no idea the war he had just declared. My breath caught in my throat, a ragged, sharp thing. I stared at the words on the page, maternal hysteria, fabricating data, child endangerment, and they felt like poison darts, each one finding its mark. My vision swam. For a wild moment, I wanted to laugh. That doctor, that arrogant man in his sterile white coat, was accusing me of endangering my child when he was the one letting him wither away with a prescription for ibuprofen and a pat on the head. "This is insane," I finally managed, my voice a strangled whisper. I looked up at Evans, pleading with my eyes. "This is retaliation." I questioned his diagnosis. I brought him my data he refused to even look at, and now he's doing this to discredit me, to cover for his own negligence. I pushed the hateful letter back toward him. "Dr. Evans, David, you know my work. You've seen my dedication. It's not unregulated. It's the culmination of a decade of peer-reviewed foundational research. The only thing that's changed is that I now have a personal, urgent application for it. My son is sick. That doctor is failing him. My research is the only thing that's giving us any answers." I was trying to appeal to the man I'd worked with for years, the academic who I thought respected the scientific process. I was trying to use the system. He was my department head. He was my first line of defense. He just shook his head, his expression hardening from pity to a kind of weary resignation. It was the look of a bureaucrat, not a scientist. "Eris, I understand you're upset, but a formal complaint of this nature from a licensed physician, it can't be ignored. The university's ethics board will have to be convened." "Then let them," I said, my voice rising. "I'll show them everything, the data, Leo's medical history, my notes. I can prove." "No," he cut me off, and the finality in that single word was like a door slamming shut in my face. "You don't understand. Until the board reviews the complaint from Dr. Jennings, all research related to this project is suspended. And given that the complaint involves your direct access to a minor, I have to officially revoke your access to the lab and all university databases. Effective immediately." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. Revoke my access, he was locking me out. He was taking my key. He was siding with the doctor. "You're shutting me down," I said, the words numb on my tongue, "based on a lie." "I'm following protocol, Eris," he said, his voice devoid of any real sympathy. He was protecting the university. He was protecting himself. He was just another cog in the system that was grinding my son's hope into dust. "Turn in your keys and your ID card." I walked out of his office in a daze, the plastic card and the cold metal keys feeling impossibly heavy in my palm as I placed them on his assistant's desk. I didn't look at her. I couldn't bear to see the pity or curiosity in her eyes. The system hadn't just failed me, it had actively turned against me. It had taken the doctor's complaint, wrapped it in official letterhead and procedure, and used it as a cudgel to beat me into submission. My frustration was a physical sickness, a sour taste in the back of my throat, but beneath it, a cold, terrifying fear was beginning to spread through my veins. They had taken my lab, they had taken my data, they had taken my tools. And Leo was still at school, his joints probably already starting to ache, and his mother, the scientist, the one person on Earth who was supposed to be able to fix this, had just been rendered completely and utterly powerless. I stumbled out into the afternoon sun, the campus grounds suddenly feeling alien and hostile. Students laughed on the manicured lawns, their lives blissfully untouched by the kind of institutional betrayal that had just hollowed me out. I made it to my car, my hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get the key in the ignition. Powerless. The word echoed in the empty space where my professional identity used to be. He had done this. That doctor, with a single vindictive letter, had severed my access to a decade of my own work. He had taken away my ability to fight for my son with the only weapons I had. The drive home was a blur of traffic lights and curses muttered under my breath. When I walked through my own front door, the familiar scent of home, of lemon cleaner, and the faint, lingering smell of Leo's toast from breakfast offered no comfort. It felt like a cage. My husband, Mark, was home early, his car already in the driveway. He met me in the hall, his face etched with a concern that quickly sharpened into alarm when he saw the look on my face. "Eris, what is it? What's wrong?" I tried to form the words, but they came out in a torrent of rage and despair. He shut me down. Evans, he suspended my research, revoked my lab access. "It's the doctor," he filed a complaint. "Ethics violation. Child endangerment, Mark. He's accusing me of endangering Leo." Mark's face went pale. He pulled me into an awkward, stiff hug. Okay, slow down. We'll fight this. We'll get a lawyer. It's outrageous." But I could hear the tremor in his voice. The system was big, and we were small. The doorbell rang, a sharp, intrusive chime that made us both jump. We looked at each other, a shared, unspoken dread passing between us. It was too early for Leo to be home from school. Mark moved to answer it, and I followed, a cold knot forming in my stomach. On our welcome mat stood a woman in a sensible pantsuit, holding a clipboard. Her smile was professionally gentle, which was somehow more terrifying than any scowl. "Mr. and Mrs. Thorne?" she asked, her eyes flicking between us. "My name is Ms. Albright. I'm with the Division of Family and Children Services." The world tilted. I grabbed the doorframe for support. Mark's hand found the small of my back, but it felt a million miles away. "We received a report of concern today," she continued, her voice calm and practiced, "from a medical professional, a Dr. Jennings." There it was again, his name. The doctor wasn't just content to destroy my career. He had reached past the university, past the ethics board, and into my home. He had sent the government to my door to investigate my fitness as a mother. He expressed concern, Ms. Albright said, her gaze sweeping past me into our tidy living room, regarding potential medical neglect and a parent fabricating symptoms in a minor. "I'll need to come in. I'll also need to speak with your son, Leo, alone." This was his endgame. This was the escalation. He wasn't just trying to silence my research, he was trying to take my son. He was using the power of his title, the weight of his credentials, to paint me as an unhinged mother, to turn my fight for Leo's health into a weapon that could be used to tear our family apart. The fear I'd felt earlier was gone, burned away by a white-hot singular fury. This was no longer my safe space. It was a battlefield, and the doctor had just made the fatal mistake of bringing the war to my front door. He thought he had made me powerless. He was about to find out what a mother with nothing left to lose could do. My gaze locked on Ms. Albright. The polite, professional mask on her face was more chilling than any open hostility. She was a functionary of the system, a system that now saw me, a mother desperate to heal her child, as a potential criminal. Mark's hand tightened on my back, a silent anchor in the storm that doctor had unleashed. "You are not speaking to my son alone," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. The fury inside me had burned away all the fear, leaving something cold and unbreakable. "My husband and I will be present, and we will be recording the entire conversation." Ms. Albright's professional smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "That's a rather unusual request, Mrs. Thorne." "These are unusual circumstances," Mark cut in, his voice firm, backing my play. "The doctor is retaliating against my wife for questioning his judgment, and he's using state agencies to harass our family. So yes, we'll be present and we'll be recording." She saw the unified front, the lack of hysteria she was probably trained to look for. She saw two parents who were not going to be intimidated. After a tense moment, she gave a stiff nod. "Very well. I'll need to schedule a time to return with a colleague." She made a note on her clipboard, her eyes darting around our home one last time, cataloging, judging. When she finally left, the click of the front door closing was like the cocking of a gun. The moment she was gone, Mark turned to me, his face a wreck of fear and anger. "A lawyer, heiress. First thing tomorrow. We sue him for defamation. We sue the university." "No," I said, walking past him toward my laptop on the dining room table. "That's their game. A game of delays and motions and money. A game we can't win in time." I opened the screen. "Leo doesn't have time for lawyers. He needs a solution, not a settlement." "But what can you do?" he asked, his voice raw with helplessness. "They've taken your lab, your data. They sent social services to our door. They have all the power." "They think they do," I said, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I pulled up a password-protected folder on a private cloud server, a triple encrypted backup of my entire life's work. "They took my key, but they didn't take my knowledge. They locked me out of their building, but they can't lock me out of my own mind." For the next 48 hours, I didn't sleep. Fueled by coffee and a righteous rage, I turned our dining room into a war room. I compiled everything, my decade of foundational research, the specific genetic sequencing I'd done on Leo, his entire medical history, charting his decline, scans of the condescending dismissal notes from the doctor, a detailed, time-stamped log of his escalating symptoms. I wrote out the entire story, from the first pangs of pain to the social worker standing on our doorstep. I attached the formal ethics complaint from Dr. Jennings and the suspension letter from Dr. Evans. I laid it all bare. Then I went into Leo's room. He was sitting up in bed, drawing in a sketchbook, his face tight with a pain he was trying to hide. I sat beside him. "Hey, buddy. Can I ask you something? Do you remember when that doctor wouldn't listen to Mommy? Do you want to help me make people listen?" He looked at me, his eyes old and weary in his young face, and nodded. I hit publish. I sent the link to every major news outlet, every medical ethics blog, and every patient advocacy group I could find. I posted it on the social media channels I'd started, the ones where I'd been shouting into the void. But I wasn't shouting anymore, I was presenting evidence. The void answered. The story exploded. It was picked up by a local blogger, then a national news site. My useless research, explained in clear, layman's terms alongside the story of a mother's fight, was suddenly very, very useful. Other parents came forward with similar stories about the same doctor. The university, facing a tidal wave of public outrage, issued a statement and immediately reinstated my access. But I didn't go back. I had my own lab now, and it was the entire internet. 2 weeks later, a thick envelope arrived by certified mail. It was a summons. Not for me, but for him. The state medical board was holding an emergency hearing regarding the license of Dr. Robert Jennings. I was their star witness. The day of the hearing, I walked through the doors of the municipal building, my head held high. The air was thick with the scent of floor wax and nervous tension. I followed the signs to a large, oak-paneled room. Through the small window in the door, I could see him, the doctor. He was sitting at a table, flanked by lawyers, his face pale, his arrogance finally stripped away, replaced by a dawning, panicked dread. He had tried to take my son, my career, and my home. He had used the system to make me powerless, so I had built a bigger system, one made of truth and light. And now, I was about to walk through that door and watch as it burned his world to the ground. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room fell silent. Every head turned. The panel of grim-faced board members at the front, the university's nervous legal counsel, and him, the doctor. He sat beside his own lawyers, looking smaller than I remembered, his expensive suit doing nothing to hide the tremor in his hands. The arrogant god from the sterile white room was gone, replaced by a man drowning in the consequences of his own hubris. My presence was an accusation before I'd even spoken a word. I took my seat at the witness table, placed my laptop beside me, and met his gaze across the room. There was no recognition of me as a person in his eyes, only as a problem he had failed to eliminate. My testimony was calm, methodical. I was a scientist presenting her findings. I laid out the facts, my voice even and clear, refusing to let the emotion churning in my gut betray me. I spoke of Leo's symptoms, of my research, of the appointment where I was dismissed, not as a scientist, but as a hysterical mother. I presented the file he had refused to look at. I detailed his campaign of retaliation, the ethics complaint, the call to my boss, the social worker at my door. As I spoke, I saw the narrative solidifying in the board members' faces. This was a case of a doctor's arrogance, of gross negligence. And for a moment, I thought that would be enough. Then his lawyer stood up, a shark in a $1,000 suit. The board must understand, he began, his voice smooth as oil. Dr. Jennings is not some simple clinician. He is a leading researcher, a consultant on a major longitudinal study with Pharmagen Corp. His decisions are informed by a wealth of data far beyond what Mrs. Thorne, with her niche project, could possibly access. He motioned for an aide to place a thick, bound document before the board. This is the charter for Project Chimera, the study Dr. Jennings has been a part of for 5 years. It is a multi-million-dollar investigation into pediatric autoimmune disorders. His adherence to established protocols wasn't dismissal, it was discipline. He was protecting his patient from unverified, emotionally driven hypotheses. Something flickered in my memory. Project Chimera. I'd seen it referenced in a footnote years ago. I leaned forward, my eyes fixed on the copy of the charter passed to me. And then I saw it. On page 3, under a list of principal consultants, a name, Dr. Alistair Finch. My blood ran cold. The room, the voices, the doctor's panicked face, it all faded into a roaring in my ears. Dr. Finch. He had published a paper 7 years ago on a set of genetic markers correlated with inflammatory responses. It was a landmark study that had been quietly, mysteriously retracted and scrubbed from most academic servers just months after publication for methodological inconsistencies. It was the very paper that had inspired the direction of my own research. I had a copy saved on my encrypted server, a ghost I'd been chasing for my entire career. My fingers flew across my laptop's keyboard, my movements frantic, instinctual. I pulled up the file, the forbidden paper. I pulled up my own research, the markers I'd found in Leo. And then I pulled up the public-facing mission statement for Pharmagen's leading anti-inflammatory drug, Cytoblock, a blockbuster medication often prescribed off-label to children. With a final click, it all snapped into place, a mosaic of pure, calculated evil. The markers Finch had found, the markers I had found, the markers in my son, were linked to a devastating reaction to the primary compound in Cytoblock. The drug didn't just fail to help children with this genetic profile. It actively accelerated their autoimmune response. It was gasoline on a fire. Project Chimera wasn't a study to find a cure. It was a 5-year, multi-million-dollar campaign to bury Finch's original findings, to create a mountain of counterdata to protect Pharmagen's billion-dollar drug. This wasn't about negligence. It was never about negligence. The doctor hadn't dismissed me because he was arrogant. He had dismissed me because he was a paid gatekeeper. When I walked into his office with my printout, he hadn't seen a desperate mother. He had seen a ghost. He saw the one piece of independent data that could unravel the entire conspiracy, and he had panicked. His attempts to destroy my career and take my son weren't the acts of a wounded ego. They were a corporate hit, executed by a man in a white coat. "Stop," I said, my voice cutting through his lawyer's drone. I stood up, my body shaking with a fury so pure it was ice. I turned my laptop screen toward the board. "This hearing is not about negligence." I projected my screen onto the wall. On one side, Finch's retracted paper, on the other, my own data from Leo. The genetic markers were a perfect match. Dr. Jennings' lawyer is correct. He is a researcher. He's a key part of Project Chimera, a project funded by Pharmagen designed to suppress the findings of this paper. I pointed a trembling finger at the screen. A paper that proves their flagship drug, Cytoblock, is catastrophic for children with this genetic profile. I turned my gaze on the doctor. His face was the color of ash. "You knew. The moment I handed you that file in your office, you knew exactly what you were looking at. You weren't protecting Leo from a hysterical mother. You were protecting Pharmagen from the truth. How many other children have you dismissed? How many other kids have you sentenced to a lifetime of pain, or worse, to protect your consulting fees?" The room was utterly silent, the weight of the accusation hanging in the air. His lawyer was sputtering, but there was no defense. The evidence was there, illuminated on the wall. A decade of my useless research suddenly becoming the key that unlocked a conspiracy of breathtaking malice. The doctor stared at me, his mouth slightly open, the mask of professionalism finally, completely shattered. In his eyes, I saw it all, not a confession in words, but in the stark, soul-deep terror of a man who had been caught. He had tried to burn my world down to hide his sins, but he'd only succeeded in lighting the pyre for his own. The sound of my own voice died, leaving a void so absolute it felt like the air had been sucked from the room. My accusation hung there, shimmering and monstrous in the sudden deafening silence. For a long second, nobody moved. The doctor's face, projected in my mind's eye over and over, was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He looked at me, then at the screen, then back at me. It was done. The truth was out, and it was undeniable. Then, the adrenaline that had been a pillar of fire inside me vanished, and my body remembered it was just flesh and bone. My knees buckled. I grabbed the edge of the witness table to keep from collapsing, my knuckles white. The shaking started in my hands and spread through my arms, my whole body trembling with the aftershock of a battle I hadn't even realized I was winning until it was over. The roaring in my ears subsided, replaced by the frantic, useless sputtering of the doctor's lawyer shouting about slander and inadmissible evidence. But it was too late. The head of the board, a stern-faced woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, held up a hand that silenced him instantly. She looked from my laptop screen to the ashen face of the doctor, and a look of cold, professional fury settled over her features. "These proceedings are suspended," she announced, her voice ringing with authority. She turned to a clerk. "Get the district attorney's office on the phone, now. And someone call the police. This is now a crime scene." The system, the one that had chewed me up and spat me out, was finally starting to move. But this time, it was moving with me, not against me. 2 uniformed officers arrived within minutes, their presence shifting the atmosphere from a tense hearing to a formal investigation. They weren't like Ms. Albright, with her judging eyes and placid smile. They were serious, direct. One of them, a detective with tired eyes, approached me, not with suspicion, but with a quiet respect. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low. "I'm Detective Miller. We're going to need to secure all of this as evidence. Your laptop, the documents." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I closed the lid of my laptop, the click echoing in the quiet room. This machine held my life's work, my son's salvation, the proof of a conspiracy that had almost destroyed us. I had guarded it, hidden it, used it as a weapon. Now I was handing it over. I slid it across the table to him. "Everything is there," I managed to say, my voice hoarse. Finch's retracted paper, my research, Leo's full medical files, a time-stamped log of every interaction with Dr. Jennings. He took it carefully like it was the fragile, precious thing it was. "Thank you, Mrs. Thorne. We'll be in touch. We're going to need a full statement from you." I just nodded again, watching as another officer spoke quietly to the doctor. He didn't look like a powerful physician anymore. He looked like a cornered animal. When they asked him to stand, he did so slowly, his movements stiff. He wasn't in handcuffs, not yet, but as they escorted him from the room, it was clear he was no longer a man in charge of his own destiny. He was evidence, just like my laptop. He glanced at me one last time as they led him past my table. The terror in his eyes had been replaced by a hollow, bottomless hatred. It didn't touch me. It couldn't. I watched him go, and I felt nothing. Not triumph, not joy, just a vast, empty quiet. The fire that had driven me for months had burned itself out, leaving only the profound, bone-deep exhaustion of a soldier after the war is won. The system hadn't worked. I had made it work. I had taken my useless research and forced it down the throat of the institution that had mocked it, until it had no choice but to listen. I had held the truth up to the light, and the monsters had scattered. Mark was at my side in an instant, his hands on my arms, his face a jumble of relief and awe. "Eris, you did it. My God, you did it." His voice was thick with emotion, but it sounded like it was coming from the end of a long tunnel. I leaned into him, not for comfort, but because my legs refused to hold me up on their own. I let him guide me out of that suffocating room, past the stunned faces of the university lawyers and the grim-faced board members. The world outside the hearing room was muted and indistinct. The bright hallway lights felt dim, the patterns on the linoleum floor meaningless. All the sharp edges of my reality had been worn smooth by exhaustion. The fight was over. The dragon was slain. But I wasn't a triumphant hero. I was just a survivor, standing in the wreckage, covered in ash. The drive home was silent. Mark kept glancing at me, his brow furrowed with concern, but he didn't speak. I think he understood that there were no words. What could he say? Congratulations on immolating a man's career to save our son? Good job turning your life's work into a weapon? I stared out the window at the passing houses and trees, at people walking their dogs, and felt a profound sense of disconnection. They were living in a world I no longer recognized, one where the systems worked and monsters weren't real. When we got home, Leo was on the sofa, watching cartoons. He looked up as I walked in, and his face broke into a wide, beautiful smile. "Mommy!" He scrambled up and ran to me, wrapping his arms around my legs. I sank to my knees and hugged him, burying my face in his hair, inhaling the simple, clean scent of my little boy. This was it. This was the prize. He was safe. He was here. He would get better. But as I held him, a wave of nausea rolled through me. Every data point I had ever collected, every late night in the lab, every line of code I'd ever written, it all swirled together in my mind, coalescing into the terrified, hate-filled face of the doctor as he was led away. My research wasn't mine anymore. It was tainted, inextricably bound to him and his crimes. It was a monument to the worst months of our lives. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in the hearing room, the weight of the world on my laptop. Or I was at my front door, watching Ms. Albright's placid smile, feeling the primal terror of a mother about to lose her child. I got out of bed and went to the dining room, where my backup hard drive sat on the table. My work, my victory. I plugged it in, and the files loaded. The familiar charts, the strings of genetic code. But I felt no pride, no spark of discovery. I saw an arsenal. Each file was a bullet. Each correlation, a sharpened blade. I saw the face of Dr. Finch, a ghost in the machine whose work had been buried. I saw the doctor, a man who had chosen money over a child's life. This work hadn't just saved my son, it had revealed a capacity for darkness in the world that I could never again unsee. I slammed the laptop shut. A tremor started in my hands, the same one from the hearing room. I was no longer a scientist seeking truth. I was a veteran of a war. One never wanted to fight, and my research was a battlefield I never wanted to visit again. The rage was gone, and in its place was a hollow, aching void. I had won. We were safe. But I was terrified that the person I had to become to achieve that victory was now the only person I was. The days that followed were a strange, distorted echo of a life I once knew. My name was in the news, my face on TV screens, a reluctant symbol of a mother's fight. The story of the doctor, Project Chimera, and Pharmagen had exploded into a full-blown national scandal. He was facing criminal charges, the company's stock was in free fall, and a class action lawsuit was growing by the hour. We were safe. Leo had seen a new team of specialists, real scientists, who looked at my research with wide, hungry eyes. He was on a new treatment protocol, one tailored to his specific genetic profile, and for the first time in years, the fire in his joints was beginning to recede. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt like a ghost in my own home. I would watch Leo playing, a real, genuine laugh bubbling up from his chest, and feel a pane of thick glass between us. I had done this. I had saved him, but the person who had crossed that finish line was a stranger to me, a cold, hard creature of pure tactical fury, and I didn't know how to leave her behind. Then the call came. The caller ID read, University Mainline, and my stomach twisted into a familiar knot. It was Dr. Evans. Eris, he said, his voice oozing a practiced sincerity that turned my stomach. I am so sorry. What you've been through, what that man put you through, it's unconscionable. We were misled. The university would like to make it right. I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. We want you back, of course, he continued, filling the void. Your lab is waiting. We're prepared to offer you a full professorship, tenure, and triple the research funding. Head your own division, whatever you want, Eris. You're a hero. A hero. The word was acid on my tongue. I'll be on campus in an hour, I said, and hung up. I walked into his office, the same room where he had stripped me of my keys and my dignity, and felt nothing. He stood to greet me, his hand outstretched, a hopeful, nervous smile plastered on his face. I ignored the hand and sat down, placing a single manila folder on the polished oak between us. The power dynamic had been irrevocably inverted. He was no longer a department head managing a hysterical employee. He was a man desperate to put out a fire I had started. Eris, as I said, You followed protocol, David. I cut him off, my voice flat and devoid of heat. That's what you told me. A formal complaint from a licensed physician couldn't be ignored. You sided with him. You took his word, the word of a man you didn't know, over mine, a colleague of 10 years. You locked me out of my own work based on a lie because it was the easiest thing to do. It wasn't about ethics. It was about liability. He flinched, his smile collapsing. The situation was complex. My hands were tied. No, I said, the single word, as sharp and final as it had been when he'd said it to me. Your hands were not tied. You made a choice. You chose to protect the institution from a potential headache. You chose to sacrifice me and my son to do it. The only thing that changed your mind was the press. You're not sorry for what you did, David. You're sorry it blew up in your face. I pushed the folder toward him. I don't want my lab back. I don't want a professorship in your broken system. He opened the folder, his face paling as he read. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a proposal. The university will be a party to the class action suit against Pharmagen. I stated, not as a question, but as a fact. And when you get your settlement, you will use it to fund this, the Finch Institute for Independent Research. His eyes widened. Named for Dr. Alistair Finch, I continued, the man whose work you all let them bury. It will be a new entity, governed by an independent board on which I will sit. Its sole purpose will be to fund and protect research that challenges established medical and corporate interests. It will be a place for the next hysterical mother with a data file. It will be the protocol for when the system fails. You will build a lifeboat, David. That is your penance, and it is my price. He stared at the proposal, then at me. He saw the woman from the news. He saw the public relations nightmare that would follow if he refused. He saw a person with nothing left to lose and all the leverage in the world. Yes, he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. Of course, we'll do it. I stood up and walked out of his office without another word. I didn't need his apologies. I needed him to fix the system that had almost cost me everything. That evening, I sat at my dining room table and opened my real backup drive, the one the police hadn't needed. I looked at the files, the neat columns of data, the charts, the timelines, the arsenal. My finger hovered over the mouse. For months, this work had been my sword and shield. It had been my rage, made tangible. But the war was over. I didn't need to be a soldier anymore. I selected all of it, the doctor's file, the hearing prep, the corporate conspiracy maps, and moved it all to the trash. I didn't delete it. Not yet. But I put the weapons away. Leo padded into the room, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He wasn't crying. He wasn't curled in a ball of agony. He was just a little boy who'd had a bad dream. He climbed into my lap and rested his head against my chest. I held him, feeling the steady, gentle rhythm of his breathing. The glass between us was gone. I was just his mom, and in the quiet of my home, surrounded not by the ghosts of my enemies, but by the fierce, simple love for my son, I finally felt the first fragile tendrils of peace. I had won. But more than that, I had survived myself. 3 months. It's funny how time can be both a blur and an eternity. 3 months ago, I was a soldier in a war. One didn't know I was fighting. Now I'm just a mom watching her son chase a soccer ball across the backyard. Leo's laughter, loud and breathless, is the only sound that matters. He stumbles, falls onto the soft grass, and bounces right back up, his face flushed with joy, not fever. There's no pane of glass between us anymore. The peace I felt then was fragile. Now, it's settling into the foundation of our lives, one scraped knee and genuine smile at a time. My therapist, a kind woman named Elena, who never once used the word hysteria, told me I needed to learn how to put down my armor. The war is over, Eris, she'd said last week. You don't have to wear the helmet to breakfast. For a long time, I didn't know how. The rage had been a part of my anatomy, a second skeleton holding me upright. Without it, I feared I'd collapse into a heap of grief and exhaustion. But watching Leo now, I realized the armor was heavier than I ever knew. After tucking Leo into bed tonight, I walked to the dining room. The table, once my war room, is clear, save for a stack of mail and a half-finished puzzle. I sit down and open my laptop, the real one, with my personal backup. The trash icon on the desktop is full. I click on it, and the files appear in a list. Jennings_complaint.pdf, Pharmagen_conspiracy_map.docx, hearing_testimony_final.txt. The arsenal, my sword and shield. For weeks, I couldn't bring myself to do it. It felt like erasing the scars, pretending the battle never happened. But Elena was right. I don't need the helmet anymore. I take a breath, a real one that fills my lungs, and click, empty trash. The files dissolve into nothing, and I feel a lightness I haven't experienced in years. It's not forgetting. It's forgiveness, not for them, but for myself. With the digital ghosts exorcised, I open my email. Tucked between a notification about the Finch Institute's first board meeting and a message from Mark is an email with the subject line, "I think you're the only person who will believe me." My heart gives a familiar, painful lurch. It's from a woman named Sarah. Her daughter has a mysterious ailment, joint pain, fatigue. She attached a small data file. She writes about being dismissed by specialist after specialist, about a doctor who told her she was projecting her own anxiety onto her child. It's my story, written in another woman's handwriting. The old me, the soldier, would have felt the call to arms, the familiar surge of white-hot rage. I do feel a flicker of it, a ghost of an echo, but it's quickly replaced by something else, a deep, aching empathy. I open her data file. It's rudimentary, but the markers are there. Not the same as Leo's, but similar. A different chapter in the same awful book. I think of the doctor, a man now awaiting trial, his name a synonym for corporate greed. I think of the system I had to break, and the new one I am trying to build. I could forward this to the Institute. I could pass it off to the lawyers handling the class action. Instead, I click Reply. My fingers move across the keyboard, but the words are not a declaration of war. They are a hand reaching out in the dark. Sarah, I write. I believe you. I see it. You are not alone in this. Let's talk tomorrow. We'll figure out the next right step. Together. I hit send. I look out the window into the dark, quiet yard where my son was just playing. The work isn't a weapon anymore. It's a lamp. And I'm not a soldier, covered in ash, fighting for survival. I'm a scientist again. But this time, I'm not just hunting for correlations in the dark. I'm holding a light for the next person who finds themselves lost in it. A year has passed. The seasons turned, and with them, the pages of our lives. The scandal has faded from the headlines, becoming another archive story of corporate malfeasance. The doctor was convicted, his name now a cautionary tale whispered in medical ethics classes. Pharmagen settled the class action lawsuit for a figure with an obscene number of zeros. The Finch Institute, built with that money, is a real brick-and-mortar building on the far side of campus, a place I've only visited once, for the ribbon cutting. My life is quiet now. The quiet used to feel like a void, a silence where the battle cry should be. Now it just feels like peace. Leo is 9. He's tall for his age, all lanky limbs and boundless energy. He has a favorite spot on the couch, a cowlick that won't be tamed, and a deep, abiding love for pepperoni pizza. He has no memory of the pain that once consumed him. To him, the doctor is a phantom, a forgotten nightmare from a life that belongs to someone else. That, I think, is the most profound victory of all. I sit at the dining room table, the same table that served as my war room. It's cluttered now, not with legal documents and data charts, but with Leo's homework and a half-eaten bag of apple slices. I open my laptop. The emails still come, a slow but steady trickle into the address I set up after the hearing. They are from mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers. Each one is a different version of the same story. A loved one is sick, no one will listen, and they are desperate. For a long time, each email felt like a summons, a ghost rattling its chains, trying to pull me back onto the battlefield. My first instinct was always to forward them to the Institute, to pass the torch and retreat back into the safety of my own life. But tonight, I open one from a man in Ohio, whose wife has been suffering for years, dismissed as being chronically fatigued, depressed, anxious. He's attached a 23andMe file, a desperate shot in the dark. I download it. I run the sequence against the expanded database I now manage, a library of ghosts and whispers I've collected over the past year. And there it is, a marker. Not Leo's, but a cousin to it, a variation I've only seen hypothesized in old, obscure journals. It's a key, a starting point. The old me, the soldier, would have felt the familiar rage, the call to arms. But I am not a soldier anymore. I am a mapmaker. I look at this string of code not as a weapon, but as a signpost, a light in the fog. I don't feel rage. I feel purpose. My useless research was never about one boy, my boy. It was about all of them. It was a key meant to unlock more than one cage. I write back to the man from Ohio. I tell him what I found. I give him the names of 3 researchers at the Finch Institute. I give him the name of a lawyer who specializes in medical negligence. I give him the one thing that doctor tried to take from me, a path forward, hope. As I press send, I lean back in my chair. The house is silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Leo is sleeping peacefully upstairs. Mark is reading in the living room. We are safe. We are whole. I did not just survive the war. I found my way home. The work is not a burden anymore. It's not a monument to my pain. It is a bridge, built from the rubble of my old life, leading to someone else's rescue. And I am the keeper of that bridge. I started this channel to tell my story, to prove I wasn't crazy or alone. Now it's about making sure no one else ever has to feel that way again. My fight is over, but their fights are just beginning. And I'm going to be here for every single one. So please, like and subscribe. Because this story is far from over.